We will launch first in the US, Canada, the UK, and most of Europe. It's been my privilege today to introduce Stadia on behalf of the thousands of Googlers who've worked tirelessly to bring this vision to life. This is the first step in the journey, and we'll be connecting with you again in the summer to share more details on the games you'll get to play at launch and beyond.
Yep, that's me. You're probably wondering how I ended up in this situation. After all, it's not every day you get to see a multi-million-dollar project from a trillion-dollar company crash and burn so quickly. Just look at how far we've come in only 3 years. Well, allow me to take you back to where it all started. Cloud gaming is hardly a new invention. Going as far back as the early 2000s, with IPTV set-top boxes created by G-Cluster, allowing users to connect to their cloud gaming service, plenty of companies have attempted to display the viability of cloud gaming, often with pretty mixed results. For years after G-Cluster's official first release, cloud gaming often seemed to be limited by a variety of technical issues and server infrastructure costs, with developers such as Crytek halting their research into cloud gaming's viability due to the cost of bandwidth. It wouldn't be until the 2010s that a new wave of interest began to spread. A company like Gaikai would manage to sign a major deal with Samsung, before going on to be acquired by Sony in 2012 for $340 million. Their technology would lay the framework for the PlayStation Now cloud gaming service offered by Sony. Despite the success of a handful of companies, cloud gaming services have often struggled to attract a significant audience. PlayStation Now reportedly had 2.2 million subscribers back in May of 2020, which doesn't sound too bad, but it's still only a small percentage of the 103 million monthly PlayStation Network users. No one really knew how many people would be interested in such a service if it was heavily pushed and properly marketed. On top of the unclear customer data, cloud gaming was becoming more and more expensive for anyone looking to explore the technology. Taking the burden of processing games and putting that on web servers is already a significant startup cost, but when you factor in other expenses such as needing to license a large library of games, it was looking more and more like only a big established company would be capable of seeing what cloud gaming was truly worth. And this is where our story begins. In comes Google, a large tech company with experience as a service provider, and someone capable of maintaining the servers needed to make cloud gaming work. They may have not had the largest amount of experience with the games industry directly, but on paper, they seemed like a candidate that could make everything work. Engineers and developers? Check. Powerful servers? Check. Money to do everything else? Check. Reportedly, Stadia's planning and development goes back quite a few years. Ever since the release of Chromecast in 2013, engineers at Google had been theorizing if it was possible to bring gaming to a device with such limited processing power, leading to some investigative research over the following years to see if their theory could work. As it turns out, it probably could, and so they began putting together a professional team under the leadership of Phil Harrison, an industry executive with experience working for and advising other large gaming companies, such as Sony, Microsoft, Atari, and notably Gaikai. The first iteration of Stadia wouldn't be announced though until late 2018. Going by the name Project Stream, this was a small beta test that allowed users to access a copy of Assassin's Creed Odyssey from the Chrome browser. After creating an account and passing a short connection check, testers were free to fully play through the game. Now, despite being a newly announced work-in-progress service, according to many who were invited, the experience was actually quite positive. Controls seemed to be responsive, gameplay looked smooth, and outside of a few minor issues like audio compression problems, poor connection reducing texture quality, or too many programs running on your PC creating lag, everything really ran fine. This was a beta after all, and the problems that did exist seemed minor. It didn't matter what device people were on either. Windows or Mac, if you had a stable connection, you could run the game. And with this test being a success, an official announcement regarding the service's launch was made only a few months later in March 2019. Google would formally introduce Stadia at the Games Developers Conference for everyone to see.
Our vision for Stadia is simple. One place for all the ways we play. It's focused on gamers, inspired by developers, and amplified by YouTube creators.
In order to deliver an amazing experience for your games, we needed to bring powerful computing closer to users. We've built Stadia's architecture on top of the Google Data Center network, the same network that has been delivering search results to your fingertips in milliseconds for more than 20 years. And here's how the graphical power of Stadia compares to the top 2 consoles in the market. You can see, thank you. You can see that a single Stadia instance is a big step forward. 10.7 teraflops is more powerful than the top 2 consoles of the previous generation combined.
We are forming Stadia Games and Entertainment, which will build experiences designed exclusively for Stadia as Google's own first-party game studio.
So not only was Google intending to launch a cloud gaming service, but they were going a step further by assembling their own internal game development studio with over 150 employees. There were some big hirings being made to get experienced individuals on the team, such as Jade Raymond, the founder of Ubisoft Toronto, and a large number of other senior developers from companies such as EA and Ubisoft. According to an article on Wired, this number of developers was intended to grow to over 2,000 employees over the next 5 years. Google not only saw Stadia as the next big step forward for gaming, but something that could compete and replace traditional consoles through its technical superiority. And it didn't stop there. Stadia was going to have integrated features to support live streaming with an audience, ease of access to play anywhere you go that has Wi-Fi and a compatible device, and tons of other plans for supported development. All of this looked to be an incredibly ambitious entrance into the games industry, and many people were excited by what they saw. Stadia seemed like an easily accessible platform that had a wide range of supported features, and it wasn't long before users began labeling Stadia as the Netflix of gaming, the next generation platform that would blow out the rest of cloud gaming's competition and even steal part of the console market away from companies like Sony and Microsoft. All you'd have to do is pay a monthly fee to stream their library of games anywhere you went, and thanks to the Stadia controller, you wouldn't even need to worry about having a mouse and keyboard to play. And all of this would be available later that year on November 18th. All of it seemed too good to be true, which it was. Once the hype began to die down and more information came out, people started to have a few concerns with what they were seeing. First, there was the issue of pricing. You see, everyone thought that Stadia would be like a video streaming platform such as Netflix. Pay a monthly fee, get access to all of the games. Seems simple enough. Except for Stadia, it really wasn't. Google had been quick to insist that a comparison to Netflix wasn't correct with what they were going for. And once everyone realized what they meant, many people began to question Stadia's business model. For $10 a month, you could get a Stadia Pro subscription that gave you access to a few free games and the ability to play other games at the advertised 4K resolution. If you actually wanted to play all of those AAA titles on Stadia, you'd need to purchase them at full price. But then it gets worse. If you wanted to play Stadia on launch day, an optional Stadia Pro subscription just wasn't good enough. Instead, you'd need to buy a copy of the Stadia Founders Edition. What's the Stadia Founders Edition, you ask? Well, for the low price of only $130, you'll receive a Chromecast Ultra, a Stadia controller, 3 months of Stadia Pro, a 3-month buddy pass for a friend, priority selection for usernames, and day 1 access. There was no other option available if you were going to play at launch. Want to play the new cloud-based hardware-free platform? Then you're going to need to buy some hardware if you want to play those games. Speaking of games, as the launch day approached, fans finally received a list of titles they could expect to see on Stadia, and that list would consist of a whole 12 games, though Google quickly amended this to 22 games while promising everyone that more would be available by the end of the year. Let's do a quick comparison of similar services that Stadia was being compared to. Xbox Game Pass launched back in 2017 and brought with it over 100 games you could freely play for $10 per month. Not a cloud gaming service, but still similar. There was PlayStation Now, which launched back in 2014. It had over 100 titles from earlier consoles on its launch, and its pricing was also pretty horrible, requiring people to pay to rent games for limited periods of time before being reworked into its current tiered subscription service ranging from $10 to $18 per month, with access to more games at higher tiers. You also had GeForce Now from Nvidia. It was still in beta at this point, but reportedly had over 80 games back in 2016, though some games were only available if purchased. You pay for session lengths on GeForce Now, and there's a wide variety of subscription options. All of these services had plenty more to offer by this point when compared to their launch. Even if we want to look at other modern cloud gaming services that launched after Stadia, all of them have two things in common: more games and no crazy upfront price barriers. Lastly, let's talk about the advertisements that Google had made to get people interested in Stadia.
Forget boxes, forget consoles, just your games, your screens, and electric air.
And this electric air
Is Stadia. Unlike consoles, Stadia doesn't take up any space. It makes no noise. It has no smell. Watch. Go find Stadia, boy. Don't worry. You'll never find it.
Okay.
You can play Stadia with this.
Stadia likes to party.
Up to 4K, 60 FPS.
I don't know who these advertisements are supposed to even be made for. Are people really refusing to buy modern consoles because of how much space they take up? I guess no one likes long downloads, but if you're on the type of internet connection that takes ages to download and update, are you really going to be able to stream your games without issue? Cloud gaming has often primarily appealed to individuals who didn't possess the best hardware. People who didn't play games frequently enough that they could justify investing in a modern device. But here Stadia is advertising itself as a service everyone should switch to because, hey, isn't cloud gaming cooler than your current console? More and more people were quickly abandoning Stadia as skepticism grew. But for others, they remained steadfast in believing that any issues would be quickly worked out over time, and that Stadia would find its place in the market. And then launch day arrived.
You'll laugh, you'll cry, you'll have instant buyer's guilt. It's Stadia!
A community of players is the core of Stadia. Thank you for being the first to gather round. Nope. Didn't work. Literally, none of it worked as promised.
I'm confused. And there's just so many other issues that I read to you. People are already questioning Google Stadia to begin with, and you're launching it with such a half-assed launch? Look, I understand that cloud gaming, like I said before, is the inevitable future, but we're gonna have to have corporations fall on their sword and fail till we figure out the right business model for it. And this isn't it.
Dad, did you get me that PlayStation or the Xbox? I got you Stadia.
Yeah, like it's just a weird. The people that are familiar with Stadia are gonna buy this
that's nice.
regardless of the holidays. Like that's not like a thing that you're buying your kids this year, I don't think.
Most people will tell you that the launch day for any console or platform is one of the most important days in its life cycle. A poorly timed or problematic launch in the games industry can easily define a product's reputation for years to come, requiring a company to prove they made an effort to do better if they want to salvage the reputation. And from day one of Stadia's short lifespan, there would be a mountain of issues to overcome. Right away, there was a major problem. Many of the people who had pre-ordered a copy of the Founders Edition didn't actually have access to their hardware when the service went live, with reports coming in that some people's orders were being delayed by up to 2 weeks. But even if you didn't have access to the controller and Chromecast, it should still technically be possible to play Stadia on another device like your computer. Access codes were supposed to arrive in your email, right? This then brings us to our next issue. In order to create an account, users needed a Stadia launch code which was supposed to be emailed to them after their orders were shipped. Except all of the launch codes weren't being sent out at the same time. resulting not only in some users being forced to wait multiple days until the email arrived, but in some instances, creating cases of people receiving their controller and Chromecast without getting any launch code to actually use what they had purchased. And this is just scratching the surface of the problems Stadia had. Now, assuming you received everything to play on Stadia without any incidents, there was still a good chance you'd be dealing with some major connectivity issues. People had been skeptical about Google's claim of instant processing, high-resolution gameplay, and minimal input delay since the very beginning. Even in their first presentation at GDC 2019, if you look closely at some of the on-stage tests, you might notice some minor input delay. And now, people were experiencing what they had noticed back then, but even worse. Video after video began to surface showing major issues with input delay, regardless of your connection, and there was virtually no consistency regarding what might be causing people to lag and disconnect. You could have a stable high-speed connection, and for some unknown reason, Stadia would just crash. This isn't to say that everyone was affected though. Plenty of people were showing themselves playing games without any issues, but for every user that had a perfect connection, a handful of other customers were experiencing unplayable conditions. And even if you did somehow get games not to lag, there were still other quality problems you might run into, like blurry resolution and poor graphics. People began to notice that while they were playing, texture quality would sometimes decide to randomly drop. Just over a month before release, Phil Harrison had announced that all games at launch would support 4K resolution. After all, this was a big selling point in Stadia's intro presentation. The team was confident they could supply 4K resolution gameplay at 60 FPS on high graphics settings to users, which you would expect considering these games are running on a supercomputer at a Google data center. But this claim that every game would be running at 4K resolution may have been a bit misleading. People started looking into why texture quality and resolution seemed to be so low even in the best of circumstances, and after some comparisons, it appeared that Google was actually running the games at 1080p, then upscaling the video stream to 4K, rather than the games actually being run in 4K resolution. The community even found an interview with The Verge where Destiny 2 developer Bungie confirmed that their game was running at 1080p, upscaled to 4K, and only running at the PC equivalent of medium settings. So far we've already got a pretty long list of issues. However, we haven't even gotten into the features that were missing or still in development on launch day. All of those big selling points for streamers like crowdplay, Stadia subscription gifting, and save data transfer between accounts, well, they were still a work in progress. Want to use the Stream Connect feature to show gameplay to your friends? They needed a bit more time. Maybe you just wanted to get your friends to try Stadia with you with that buddy pass you'd be receiving in your Founders Edition. Well, that'll take an additional 2 weeks after you receive your bundle. 4K resolution for PC and mobile? That'll be coming next year. Want to use an existing Chromecast Ultra? Well, maybe they'll make it work later. Want to use your wireless Stadia controller on something that isn't a TV? Sorry, but you're gonna need a wired connection. You couldn't even play Stadia on your phone unless it was a Google Pixel. Not an Android, you know, that operating system built by Google. It had to specifically be a Pixel. The list of issues and missing features just goes on and on. You had Chromecast Ultras overheating, no search function for games, no UI for achievements, having to rely on a phone app for everything, games repeatedly failing to launch, Stadia failing to launch. Every day some new issue or missing feature was being discovered as Stadia began to look worse and worse. So let's quickly recap everything. You have a cloud-based gaming platform being marketed to an unknown audience that required you to purchase hardware and didn't roll out to everyone at launch day. Assuming you could play Stadia, you were likely going to be running into connection issues, low graphics, and other missing features. And then assuming you had everything working as intended, you had a whole 22 games to choose from, only one of which was an exclusive, and most of the other games being AAA titles that had released over the past few years. All of this for $130 plus the price of games you wanted to play. Needless to say, things weren't looking great for Stadia. If you could get everything functioning without issue, then it worked as expected. You could stream any game you owned to a compatible device from any location with a working connection. It did show cloud gaming could be capable of working under the right circumstances, and if you really weren't big into gaming, then it might just be good enough for you. Unfortunately, no one could ignore the multitude of issues people were experiencing with Stadia, or the prohibitively expensive price to play right now. As a result, many reviews agreed that it was probably best to avoid buying into Stadia at the moment. If you really wanted to, it was probably best to just check back in a few months. Hopefully most of those delayed features were added, the connection issues would be fixed, the catalog of games would increase, and the ability to play would no longer require a $130 founder pack. As for Google's reaction to the criticism towards Stadia, well, there doesn't seem to have been much of one. Blame for the lack of 4K was largely shifted over to game developers, and the team developing Stadia seemed to just continue with all of their plans regardless of what people were saying. You would eventually have more games like Borderlands 3, Metro Exodus, and Cyberpunk 2077 all making their way onto the platform over the following months, and it looked like there might be some exclusives in the future as the Stadia Games and Entertainment division acquired Typhoon Studios in December. 2020 was looking like a promising year for content development. However, the damage had already been done for Stadia's reputation. It was going to take a massive turnaround this following year to win back the trust of customers. But that turnaround would not be starting in 2020. Moving into the following year, 2020 seems to have been a pretty unremarkable year for Stadia. This is more of a calm before the storm period as Google continued with their development plans. You'd see some of those missing features finally getting added alongside a bunch of new games and other general improvements as Google worked to roll Stadia out in more countries. They even began doing things like promoting free Pro subscriptions for a couple of months in an attempt to get people back on the platform once you no longer needed a Founders Pack. And while these giveaways did bring in some people temporarily, with claims that installations of the Stadia app increased by 225,000 during an April promotion, Google was still struggling. It's worth keeping in mind that this promotion and the launch of a free play tier were coming at a time when everyone was stuck indoors playing video games to pass the time, and Stadia still couldn't make a comeback. There just wasn't a good reason for many to use Stadia over other platforms, especially due to a continued lack of exclusives. Developers were also reporting that Google wasn't offering enough of an incentive to release only on Stadia or even to port their games over. While it doesn't seem like working with the Stadia team was a bad experience, with many small developers talking positively about the support Google provided, getting larger companies on board was still a major problem, as the lack of big title exclusives continued to be felt. Besides the lackluster selection of games, there were two other major issues Stadia was beginning to suffer. First, the latency issues still weren't completely satisfactory for many customers. Plenty of people were finally experiencing better play conditions, especially compared to what the launch looked like, but the fact remained that if you didn't have access to a reliable high-speed internet connection, then Stadia probably wasn't the platform for you. Everything was working and it let you play games on your terrible old devices, but that was about all Stadia had to offer. The second major issue was that Google was suddenly facing a larger amount of competition in the cloud gaming section of the market. Nvidia's GeForce Now would receive a full public release in February. Meanwhile, Amazon would announce an early access beta to their own cloud gaming platform called Luna. You even had Microsoft launching its xCloud gaming service for Game Pass. Other big companies were taking advantage of the fact that Google had set the bar pretty low to provide a better platform. Combine this with the large studio buyouts we were seeing around this time, such as Microsoft acquiring Bethesda, and it was starting to seem like Google might face issues with getting well-known titles people wanted onto Stadia. After all, why let Google put your games onto their platform when you've got your own cloud gaming service? Customers had even less reason to pick Stadia now, and 2021 was looking to become even worse, especially as Phil Harrison made a big announcement on the 1st of February. In deciding to scale the platform back and focus on helping third-party developers publish their games, Google had made the decision to shut down the Stadia Games and Entertainment division. That team of experienced developers that was allegedly going to grow into a team of 2,000 over the next 5 years, yeah, most of them were now out of a job. All of this coming just a week after Phil Harrison had congratulated them on their great progress. Naturally, following a layoff like this, more information and rumors began to spread regarding what was going on with Stadia. And this is where we begin to see just how poorly things may have been run. Reports from ex-employees state that the game production division was regularly in conflict with upper management, and the Stadia tech team who regularly ignored concerns brought forward by the game developers. An article from Wired interviewing a few ex-developers really highlights that no one at Google seemed to understand anything about game development. It was apparently an issue just for them to get the right people on board to help with the development, all because of Google's strict internal policies for bringing on new employees. And when the company implemented a hiring freeze the following year, that made growing the team nearly impossible. For those that were lucky enough to make it onto the game development team, they found themselves in an environment that was unlike anything they had really experienced before. It stated that Google would just block people from using industry-standard development software over some proclaimed security issue, all in favor of in-house software only to randomly undo their decision at a later date. Disagreements over the team's direction were apparently pretty common, and no one really threw any significant support behind any projects. Working conditions slowly improved as people adjusted to the workflow, but by the time it really mattered, Google was already looking to make cutbacks. It was also confirmed later that despite Google's repeated insistence that Stadia was indeed doing fine, they had been underperforming at every turn by hundreds of thousands of customers. The company was repeatedly trying to make multi-million-dollar deals with big companies, all to get their games on Stadia just to have no payoff. Sure, everyone could finally admit that Stadia was beginning to build a proper library of games, but with the platform's rough performance history, questionable future, and a continued lack of big-name exclusives compared to everyone else, it wasn't a surprise that they still couldn't get people to use their service. And this is how most of 2021 went for Stadia. More senior employees leaving, more questionable decisions, more bad news, and more comparison to other cloud gaming services. You even had a group of customers go out and file a class action lawsuit against Google over the 4K resolution just being an upscale and not real 4K. More and more, it was looking like Stadia probably wouldn't survive the following year without some major changes. And that's exactly what we'd start to see, as Google announced that Stadia would be shifting its business model to serving other platforms, and they'd no longer be trying to obtain big budget ports or exclusivity deals. Instead, Stadia would be taking on more white label deals, allowing developers to stream their games using Stadia's technology without requiring users to make a Stadia account. This did actually attract the attention of a few big companies. You had AT&T, which allowed customers to play a Stadia version of Batman Arkham Knight for free, while Capcom used Stadia's technology to offer a demo of Resident Evil Village through web browsers. All of that being said though, Google was still insisting that more games would be coming to Stadia, even announcing that they intended to bring over 100 games to Stadia in 2022. But by this point, no one really had any confidence in them. All of the signs were pointing to 2022 being the end of the Stadia that everyone knew. And once everyone saw the report from Business Insider on February 4th, all of those concerns were pretty much confirmed. Stadia's importance was being deprioritized internally at Google. Despite all the changes, nothing could really change the low sale numbers. Reviews were finally starting to look positive, but it was just too late. The market had changed, most of the big opportunities were gone, and Google probably wasn't going to throw millions at the software again to try making it work. And so, it came as no surprise when Phil Harrison made a short announcement at the end of September. Stadia would be discontinued the following year on January 18th. Purchases on the web store were blocked, and account sign-up was disabled. Google was at least intending to refund all hardware and game purchases users had made over Stadia's lifespan. While all of this was great for customers, companies that had been working with Google had it much worse. It seemed no one had bothered to inform any of them that this change was coming, leading to companies quickly needing to find ways of transferring user save data in multiplayer games. While bigger companies would manage, for a number of smaller studios, this announcement was pretty crippling. You see, following a new revenue sharing program launched back in July of 2021, and an offer of Stadia Pro membership splits for any developer that could bring new users to the platform, quite a few teams had been attracted by the benefits of bringing their games to Stadia finally. Google had apparently been pretty forthcoming with support for these small teams, and a significant amount of technical support for any issues they had was given to them. But now, not only were these small companies cut off from the assistance provided to them, but the deals they had made were now completely over. Anyone who had been spending months porting their game to Stadia just had all of their work made defunct without any compensation from Google. And just like that, the product that had been proclaimed as the herald of a cloud gaming revolution was suddenly at an end. The technology was being taken offline to be applied in other parts of the company. Google had effectively conceded to their competitors, as Stadia was now replaced by GeForce Now on new Chromebooks. Everything would just be slowly taken offline while refunds were issued, as the remaining team prepared for the eventual shutdown of Stadia. This is the part where I suppose we go over the question of what went wrong, but honestly, I'm not sure this needs much explaining. No matter what point you focus on as a big reason for Stadia's failure, you're probably not wrong since there were so many of them. If you properly advertise Stadia, then you've still got the technical problems at launch. Reduce the lag and you've still got no games. Add more games and you're still missing dozens of other features. Even if we wanted to do a thought experiment and imagine that all of these issues were fixed to provide a significantly better experience, I'm still not even sure that Stadia could have reached the level of success that Google wanted. Let's be real for a moment. Who was Stadia even meant for? There are definitely people out there who don't own good enough hardware to play the latest games. Or maybe you even own the latest generation console, but want to save yourself some hard drive space. I can understand why people would be interested in cloud gaming services, and the relative success of other platforms shows there's an audience out there. But none of these other services are advertising themselves as a revolutionary technology trying to replace the console market, and this audience is only a small percentage of the entire industry's customer base. I just don't think there's enough people out there lining up to abandon their hardware. Given this, it's likely that Stadia was doomed from the start. Google may have been a great company on paper to provide all of the services and infrastructure to make cloud gaming work, but they're also a company notorious for killing projects that don't meet their expectations. If Google actually wanted to make the impact they set out to create, they needed to be a lot more aggressive with their entrance into the market. Doing stuff like buying out other studios, launching with multiple high-profile exclusives, really giving people a reason to use Stadia over other platforms. At the very least, take the time to finish the features you promised people by your launch date. Also, one other thing. Once you finally figure out the audience you're trying to appeal to, it's probably not a good idea to start insulting them. Remember how streamers were such a big target of some of Stadia's features? Having your creative director going out on Twitter and making statements like, all streamers should be required to purchase licenses for games they want to stream, isn't exactly the best look to get those people on board. Would any of this have been enough to make Stadia a success? Well, who knows. According to rumors, all that Stadia may have done is encourage everyone to do exactly what Google didn't. All of those big studio buyouts we've been seeing over the last few years from Microsoft and Sony, well, some people theorize that these purchases were in part driven over fears that Google would attempt to buy them up first. In fact, Microsoft's purchase of Bethesda was reportedly brought up by Phil Harrison in a Q&A with his staff, cited as a factor in Google's decision to shut down Stadia's internal game development studio. That string of buyouts, along with Google finally realizing just how long and expensive game development could be, especially when you're building a studio from the ground up, may have been one of the largest factors in making the company pull the plug on Stadia and exit the entire market. Maybe someday we'll see another large company fully commit to throwing their hat in the ring. But until then, Stadia will continue to serve as a reminder that all the money, resources, and opportunities in the world won't matter if your understanding of the industry is completely off and your plans are horribly implemented.